The Portuguese Empire did not end with a final defeat. There was no single battle that closed the ledger. No moment when the world collectively agreed it was over. For centuries, Portugal remained present, flags raised, titles preserved, maps still colored. Yet, long before the empire receded from view, something else had already withdrawn: a sense of inevitability, a confidence that expansion still meant direction. The machinery continued to operate, but the reason it existed became harder to name. Empires are often remembered for how they fall. Portugal challenges that habit. What if decline does not announce itself? What if it spreads quietly across time, so slowly that those inside it mistake endurance for stability? This episode examines what undid Portugal's empire, not through conquest or collapse alone, but through a gradual erosion that left form intact while substance thinned. The focus is not on a single ruler or moment, but on a pattern that unfolded over centuries. How early success hardened into expectation, how continuity replaced adaptation, and how an empire learned to persist without renewal. Portugal's imperial story begins earlier than most. By the early 15th century, it had already oriented itself outward. Small in territory, limited in population, it compensated through navigation, maritime technology, and a willingness to move first. Its ships reached West Africa, then India, then Southeast Asia, then Brazil. It built trading posts instead of vast settlements, forts instead of inland empires. Influence flowed along sea lanes. At first, this system rewarded restraint. Portugal did not need to control everything. It needed only to touch key points: ports, chokeholds, crossings. Commerce, tribute, and prestige followed. For a time, this light footprint seemed efficient, even modern. It allowed Portugal to stretch farther than its size should have permitted. But this very design carried a tension. An empire built on access, rather than integration, depends on conditions remaining favorable. It depends on naval superiority holding, on trade routes staying open, on rivals arriving later, not stronger. As the 16th century progressed, those conditions shifted. Other European powers learned the same navigational skills. Dutch and English fleets challenged Portuguese control of the seas. Trade became competitive, then hostile. The empire, once ahead of its time, found itself defending a system designed for an earlier world. Portugal responded by holding on. Rather than restructuring its imperial model, it reinforced it. Forts were maintained even when they no longer paid for themselves. Routes were defended even when profits thinned. Prestige mattered. So did memory. The empire had been great. That fact became an argument for why it must remain so. In 1580, Portugal lost its independence to Spain through dynastic union. For 60 years, it was ruled by Spanish kings. During that period, many of its overseas possessions were attacked or taken by Spain's enemies. The empire weakened, but the idea of it endured. When Portugal regained independence in 1640, it did so with an empire already altered, already diminished. Still, it did not abandon the imperial identity. Instead, it adjusted its narrative. Brazil rose in importance, especially after the discovery of gold. The Atlantic replaced parts of the Indian Ocean as the center of gravity. The empire contracted, then stabilized, then convinced itself this was adaptation rather than retreat. This pattern repeated. Each loss was absorbed, each reduction reframed. Portugal did not experience sudden disintegration. It experienced a sequence of survivals, and survival, over time, became its guiding logic. By the 18th century, Portugal's empire relied heavily on Brazil. The colony supplied wealth, labor, and meaning. Lisbon became dependent on resources extracted across the ocean. The relationship was asymmetric, but stable enough to persist. When Napoleon invaded Portugal in 1807, the royal court fled not to exile, but to Rio de Janeiro. For a brief moment, the colony became the center. This inversion was unprecedented. an empire whose capital crossed the ocean to escape Europe. It preserved continuity, but it also revealed imbalance. When Brazil declared independence in 1822, Portugal lost not just territory, but its primary imperial anchor. Again, the empire did not end. Portugal retained African colonies: Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau. These holdings were less integrated, less developed, and increasingly contested by other European powers. In the late 19th century, Portugal articulated a vision of a trans-African empire linking coast to coast. The plan failed. Britain intervened. Borders were redrawn. Portugal accepted the limits imposed on it. Acceptance became habit. By the 20th century, Portugal's empire existed in a changed world. Nationalism spread. Anti-colonial movements gained momentum. Other European empires adjusted, negotiated, withdrew. Portugal did not. Under the Estado Novo regime, empire was declared essential to national identity. The colonies were renamed overseas provinces. The language changed, but the structure remained. This insistence created a new contradiction. The empire was no longer economically central, nor strategically dominant, but it was symbolically irreplaceable. To lose it would mean redefining what Portugal was, so the state delayed. Colonial wars erupted in Africa in the 1960s. They drained resources. They isolated Portugal diplomatically. They prolonged conflict without resolution. The empire was defended not because it worked, but because letting it go seemed unthinkable. When the Carnation Revolution occurred in 1974, the imperial structure collapsed rapidly. Decolonization followed within months. What had lasted for centuries dissolved almost at once. Yet even then, the sense of ending felt muted. There was relief, uncertainty, and disorientation, but not a single dramatic fall. The empire had already thinned. What remained was removed. What emerges from this history is not a story of sudden failure, but of prolonged continuation. Portugal's empire was undone not by a decisive blow, but by a long refusal to recalibrate. Its early success created a template that later generations inherited but did not redesign. Each era maintained the structure it received, adjusting just enough to survive. Over time, survival replaced purpose. The empire learned how to persist under diminishing returns. It learned how to absorb loss without altering direction. It learned how to treat contraction as endurance. This was not incompetence. It was consistency. A system optimized to avoid rupture, even at the cost of relevance. Power remained centralized. Authority was preserved. Titles endured. But coherence weakened. The empire existed more as an inherited obligation than an active project. Those who governed it did not always believe in its future, but they believed in its continuity. That distinction matters. An empire driven by belief expands, reforms, or transforms. An empire driven by continuity defends form. Portugal's decline spread because form remained convincing long after substance eroded. Maps still showed possessions, institutions still operated, ceremonies still occurred. These signals masked the absence of renewal. Decline in this case was not recognized as failure. It was experienced as normality. This pattern is not unique to Portugal, but Portugal makes it visible. The empire's longevity depended on its ability to endure without transformation. That same ability delayed adaptation. The longer it lasted, the harder it became to imagine an alternative identity. The empire was not just territory. It was explanation. It explained Portugal's place in the world, its past sacrifices, its present limitations. To question the empire was to question meaning itself. And so, questioning was deferred. Here, the inquiry turns inward. If a structure can persist long after its purpose fades, supported by habit, memory, and fear of loss, how often do we mistake continuity for justification? How many systems, beliefs, or identities do we carry forward not because they still function, but because ending them would require redefinition? Portugal's empire did not vanish when it became ineffective. It vanished when it became unsustainable to defend the illusion that it still defined the future. The quiet decline was not quiet because nothing happened. It was quiet because what happened felt familiar. Each generation inherited a smaller version of the same idea and learned how to maintain it. No one moment demanded reckoning. That came only at the end, when there was no longer space to delay. Perhaps this is what lingers. Decline does not always announce itself with crisis. Sometimes it moves by preservation, by the careful protection of forms whose meaning has already shifted elsewhere. What endures longest may not be what adapts best, but what resists recognition. And when recognition finally arrives, it rarely feels like collapse. It feels like release mixed with uncertainty, an ending that had been unfolding all along. If this reflection resonated with you, you can find more explorations like this on Timeless Questions, where history, power, and human nature quietly intersect.